Happy holidays, and thank you for watching this Gathering in Northern Hills holiday service. We welcome all of those from Heritage Unitarian Universalist Church, including their music director Les Tacey, to our Sunday, December 20 holiday service. My message theme for this December has been to focus on Advent ethics that can apply to everyone of any faith or any belief. I last spoke a few weeks ago on the Advent ideal of fact-based hope. And today, I'll speak in 3 parts on the Advent theme of promise: the promise of children, the promise of sacrifice, and the promise of good over evil. Now, on Christmas Day, most of us will at least commemorate the birth of an immigrant child of color. According to the story about him, he was conceived out of wedlock, and because of that, both he and his mother suffered lifelong insults. His parents traveled to a new town over several days, covering about 100 miles, ostensibly in midwinter, and while his mother was 9 months pregnant. The couple were from a poor rural village. The child's adoptive father had worked as a tradesman, and his mother was only 14 or 15 years of age. It's likely she had been raped and impregnated, perhaps by a foreign occupying soldier. With meager resources and no money, they could find no lodging at their destination. Fortunately for them, however, a sympathetic resident let them shelter in the ground floor of his home. But this was not comfortable housing. Ground floors at the time were where livestock slept. The child was born and soon attracted much interest. A star shining directly overhead was said to announce his arrival. He was said to be the Messiah, a child born to be king, who would unite the world and usher in a new era of peace and justice and prosperity for all. The news of the child spread to distant kingdoms, and emissaries traveled to offer him gifts. News also spread to the ruling king of the poor nation. This king was arrogant and cruel and obsessed with holding on to power. Hearing that a rival had been born, the king ordered all male infants in the village be immediately slaughtered. And so they were. But the child and his parents, however, narrowly escaped to Egypt. Years later, the child had grown into a boy of promise, one who taught adult scholars and rabbis interpretations of Scripture. Later still, he fulfilled the promises placed in him. Jesus of Nazareth became an inspirational leader of uncommon wisdom and compassion. This story I've just told is partially myth, even though the boy was a real person living 2,000 years ago. More recently, another real immigrant boy of color died in a U.S. Border Patrol station. His story is all true. He traveled 1,000 miles from a poor village in Guatemala with his adult sister. They paid $5,000 each for their journey, a huge amount that his family had saved over many years. At the border, The boy and his sister used a crude raft to cross the Rio Grande River. Once across, they were immediately captured and forcibly separated because the boy was a minor. He never saw his sister again. The boy had done nothing wrong except wanting a better future. And he, too, was a boy of promise. He was well liked, a star player on the village soccer team, and at the top of his school class. In the United States, he was placed in a caged room holding 70 boys by the Border Patrol. Even though minors are not to be held for more than 2 days, this boy was held for 6. On the 5th day, he came down with the flu. He had a temperature of 103. Guards moved him to an isolation cell with another sick boy. He was supposed to be regularly checked and treated. That night, video shows he staggered up from bed, collapsed, vomited blood, and died. He had not received any medical attention. The other boy found him, even though the Border Patrol lied and said they had found him. Carlos Hernandez's body was then returned to his home village in Guatemala. Our world is blessed with many children of promise, youth who will bring greater equity and compassion to our future world. Just like a poor immigrant boy of color living 2,000 years ago, and one who recently died in U.S. custody, every child embodies promise. Today's youth are idealistic, energetic, and deeply concerned about climate change, discrimination, and economic injustice. They promise a better world for themselves and future generations. Christmas is celebrated because of the promise it annually reminds us of, the kind of promise embodied in the 2 boys I've just described. Every child of color is valuable and equal to all other children. Every child is born innately good. Every child conjures in adults ethics of empathy and hope and providing life-nurturing needs for all. And yet today our nation and world are often indifferent to the deaths and imprisonment of immigrant children, or youth living in poverty, or children neglected, abused, sick, or other-abled. This Christmas, may we honor the child of promise born long ago by honoring what he taught as a man. May we honor children of promise who live and die right now, children who need our love, compassion, and support. May we fill our hearts with joy this Christmas by working to fulfill the promise in every single child.
Helpless and hungry, lonely, afraid, wrapped in the chill
Earl Bailey was a nurse at multiple hospitals. He was mostly assigned to COVID-19 treatment wards, where he was often the only human contact patients felt. Like all nurses, he was the one who took vital signs, put in IV drips, administered medications, and communicated with COVID patients about their condition. His necessary physical closeness to patients put him at great risk. Also, like most nurses, he was the only one who sat at COVID patient bedsides, held their hands in their solitude, reassured them, and called family members to update them on a loved one's condition. Earl began feeling sick during one of his nursing shifts. He arranged for a quick COVID test, which showed he was positive. It's impossible to know how or where he contracted the virus, but it is very likely he was infected by a patient he had treated. Immediately, Earl headed home to be in total quarantine in his bedroom, in a home he shared with his adult daughter, Sashia. She reports Earl was scrupulously careful to protect her. Before he was sick, he would come home from work, take off his clothing, and immediately put them in the wash. Then he would thoroughly shower himself. During his quarantine, he never ventured out of his bedroom except to use the bathroom he did not share. Sashia left meals outside his door. Unbeknownst to her, Earl's condition worsened. Sashia believes he told no one because he thought he was strong enough and in good enough shape such that he shouldn't burden the medical system. He knew from his nursing experience that so many others needed medical attention. Noticing he had not eaten a meal brought to him and not hearing him inside, Sashia called paramedics, who found Earl had passed away. He died from pneumonia caused by COVID. Nurses, as we know, provide the majority of hands-on care for patients. That's a reason nurses comprise 72% of healthcare workers who contract COVID-19. Earl Bailey was also a Black immigrant from Jamaica, which, according to statistics, also put him at great risk. Black people are 1.5 times as likely to contract COVID as whites. They're 4 times as likely to be hospitalized for COVID, and 3 times as likely to die from it. It's important to know that racism within healthcare systems is a primary cause of these inequities. Black people receive less than fully attentive medical care. They often live in smaller dwellings shared with multiple generations, exposing them to potential infectious diseases. And they often have underlying medical conditions due to lower quality medical care and nutrition, both due to limited finances. Among medical caregivers, Blacks also disproportionately perform higher risk tasks, ones that increase their exposure to high virus levels. Earl Bailey's nursing colleagues describe him as a healthcare superhero. He was, they said, a bodybuilder, a man of God, and a gift to his patients and to humanity. To keep his colleagues and his patients in good spirits, Earl regularly sang favorite hymns while he worked. Earl was a man of promise because of his heroic, sacrificial service to the sick and dying. Jesus of Nazareth was equally a man of sacrifice. Like Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he died a martyr's death for the ideals that he taught and practiced. He regularly modeled compassion to the sick, marginalized, and hated. Coming across 3 lepers, stories in the Bible say he touched them as a way to provide healing. Leprosy was the COVID or AIDS of his time, and people who had it were outcasts. Jesus, it said, risked his health to show compassion, empathy, and figurative healing. Jesus embraced and forgave a woman caught in adultery. He also counseled a Samaritan woman, breaking 2 social norms of the time. Women were considered of lower status than male slaves, and Samaritans were the outcast Muslims or undocumented immigrants of his time. Jesus also befriended prostitutes, criminals, and even the hated enemy of Jews, Roman soldiers. At his execution, he reached out to the thief crucified next to him, offering comfort and compassion in the man's dying hour. Jesus was killed because he did these things, practicing exactly what he taught. Being a sacrificial servant to others is not lonely. Indeed, he said, servants are greater than the ones they serve. Earl Bailey and Jesus exemplify the promise of sacrifice, something we should all celebrate this Christmas. Like those past and present who sacrifice themselves for what they believe, the promise is in their example and in their legacy. Long after the arrogant and selfish and narcissistic, greedy or despotic ones have faded into obscurity or remembered for their evil deeds only, the legacy and promise of humble sacrifice lives on. The Earl Baileys of this world and those who sacrifice in big and small ways will be remembered for eternity. That is a Christmas promise to honor.
So this is Christmas, and what have you done? Another year over, the new one's just begun.
And so this is Christmas. I hope you have fun. The near and the dear one, the old and the young. A very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Let's hope it's the one without any fear. And so this is Christmas for weak and for strong, for rich and for poor. The road is so long.
So happy Christmas, black and for white, together with red ones. Let's stop on the ride.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Let's hope it's the good one without any fear.
So this is Christmas, and what
81-year-old Ricky Jacobi was standing in the village square of a small Greek town. She was joined by hundreds of people, including dignitaries from Greece and Israel. They were there to witness the awarding of the Righteous Among Nations Medal, given to non-Jews for their courage and goodness in saving Jews during the Holocaust. The medal was posthumously given to two men, one the village priest during the 1940s, and the other to a farmer who lived at the same time. Ricky was 6 years old in 1943. Her family had just fled Athens when Nazi deportation of Jews to concentration camps had intensified. They escaped to a small rural village with a priest who was secretly known to help Jews. On their arrival, Father Nikolaos Athanasopoulos asked villagers to protect Ricky's family. Anyone who did not care for them or who betrayed their secret are not good people, he said, and the villagers agreed. Athanasios Demopoulos was a village farmer with a wife and 3 children. His small house could be divided in 2 parts, so he and his family moved into one part and gave the other side to Ricky and her family. This mountainous village, however, was not safe from World War II and Nazi evil. German troops regularly came searching for hidden guns and local partisans who fought against them. Always on their agenda was to look for Jews. Demopoulos would be alerted to Germans in the town by the priest who would ring the church bell. Demopoulos then gathered Ricky, her parents, her brother, and her grandparents, and took them to a cave where they hid until the Germans had departed the village. Demopoulos would cover the cave's entrance with branches, even as he knew if his actions were discovered, he'd be shot. Ricky herself recalls the many times in the cave by saying, quote, "I don't remember being afraid. I only remember the piece of sky that I could see between the branches." End quote. The priest, the farmer, and the villagers successfully hid Ricky and her family until the war's end. Ricky's father then took the family to live in Israel. Ricky grew into something of a leader as a young woman, and she and her husband founded a communal kibbutz village. Ricky had 10 children, who then gave her 30 grandchildren. All of them were in the village to honor those who had made their lives possible. The priest, the farmer, and the villagers fulfilled a phrase inscribed at the Holocaust Museum, quote, "Whoever saves one life saves the world entire," end quote. Ricky and her family were living proof that despite the horrific evil perpetrated by Nazis, despite the fact that 6 million of their fellow Jews had been slaughtered by Nazis, there were nevertheless deeply good people in that Greek village. There were nevertheless other good people like Oskar Schindler, who saved 1,000 Jews he employed in his factory. And there was Corrie ten Boom, who hid many Jews in her Amsterdam home. The eternal promise of goodness, light, compassion, and love prevailed over an evil that had tried to kill every single Jewish person on earth. And the same idea of good over evil was true for Jesus of Nazareth, whose birth we honor this holiday. As I earlier mentioned, good defeated King Herod and his evil plot to kill Jesus by simultaneously killing thousands of boy infants. Today, Jesus is one of only a handful of highly influential people throughout history. He's been influential because of the breathtaking good he taught, ideals that people like us still aspire to practice. He taught and practiced compassion, sacrificial service, humility, charity, peaceful nonviolence, and above all, loving forgiveness. Christians and non-Christians remember him and celebrate his life, not for religious purposes, but because of the timeless good he represents. And it is precisely his ideals, not his mythical existence as a god, that will continue for eternity. Evil may never be completely eliminated. After all, how can we know good without good's alternative? But we can know the promise embodied in Jesus' teachings and in his life. Good will always eventually prevail over evil. There will always be a spark of justice and love somewhere, no matter how powerful evil may seem at any moment. And that spark will bring light. And even a very small light always defeats darkness. We live now, as many have in the past, in foreboding times. Thousands die every week from a terrible pandemic. Millions more are hungry, alone, fearful, or out of work because of it. Anti-democratic forces threaten our nation and the world. But let us now say this, despite all the evil that we see in our world. The weak shall be strong, the sick shall be comforted, the oppressed shall find justice, and the good at heart shall endure. We promise. I wish each of you a holiday of peace and joy, inspired by the promise and spirit of children, by the promise of service to others, and by the promise of the blessing of love and of light. Thank you for listening.
I heard the bells on Christmas Day. The old familiar carols play, and mild and sweet their songs repeat, of peace on earth, goodwill to men, and the bells are ringing like a choir that's singing. In my heart I hear them, peace on earth, goodwill to men. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said. For hate is strong amongst the songs of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And the bells are ringing like sublime of peace on earth, goodwill to man, and the bells are ringing like a choir that's singing. In our hearts we hear them. Peace on earth, goodwill to man. Can you hear the bells are ringing? Like the angels singing. Open up your heart and hear them. Peace on earth, goodwill to man. Peace on earth. Peace on earth. Peace on earth, goodwill to man.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm the music director at The Gathering at Northern Hills. If you don't know me, thanks for watching our service up to this point. Hope you're enjoying it. I just wanted to take a second here to thank all the members that participated in the virtual choir. I'm going to have your names on the screen here, so congratulations. You guys did an awesome job. I really mean that. And on a deeper note, I think that it really speaks to the perseverance and the strength of all of our spirits collectively here, that we've made it through this year, and I think we're going to be seeing the end of these tough times soon. I really have hope for that. And so I want you to join me. The choir is once again going to sing and lead for us in Silent Night. I'd like for you to join me. Maybe take a second here and go grab a candle. I'm going to have a little pause here where we can go grab a candle, and we're going to sing together and just keep those spirits strong, and end out this year on a really good, a really positive note, because we've all been through a lot, and we're going to come out the other side of this better for it. So thanks so much once again, and join me in singing. Here we go.
Christmas.